Now, we've discussed all this information. Remember, safety is our #1 input, all right? If you do any unsafe act in here, I will throw you out. Be sure you got your safety glasses, your gloves, long sleeves, long pants, and closed-toe shoes, all right? Be sure the equipment is all tucked in, you're not flopping around. The reason being is not only will you might get burnt, but the student next to you may catch your shirt on fire or something if he's doing the same thing and neither one of you are paying attention. All right, remember from previous experiences, you get an 18-inch piece of copper, 1/2 inch and 3/8. You'll flare it, or correction, you'll swedge it and then insert your other piece into it, all right? Now, remember from your reading, you will not use a flux-coated rod or flux paste in this operation when you're brazing, because the Silfloss rod that you're going to be using, doesn't matter if it's from 0 to 45% silver, when you're doing copper to copper, you don't need to worry about that. The only time you need to use paste or a flux-coated rod is when you're going from copper to steel or copper to galvanized metal, all right? That's the only times. Any time in here, all you're using is the brazing rod, all right? And our brazing rods have 0 Silfloss, but because you're doing copper to copper, you don't need the silver, all right? The silver is there for strength. Now, out in the real world, yes, you will do that, all right? You can go 15, most guys do 15. If it's a specialty job, do 45, but you're talking about $2 a stick here with 0. So just imagine what it is up on silver. All right, so I've already did the swedge. I've got my 2 pieces. All I need to do is clean them. And, you know, while we're waiting, just understand, if the toolbox is missing something or it's a disaster, please just fix it, all right? Just get it cleaned up so that the next student knows what's going on. All right, so we got our sandpaper, our glasses, and our gloves. Now, some people would say, well, I don't need the gloves and glasses when I am sanding. Well, first of all, you need your gloves and glasses whenever you're down in this area, all right? The sanding, you know, copper, if you don't cut it correctly, it's going to hurt a lot, all right? And clean out your swedge port there. Now remember, we always call this the female, this is the male. If I have to explain why, well, we got more problems than we can handle. All right. So now we're going to take our 2 pieces over to the table, and you know all the layout of the table and know about getting water and everything else. Again, if it's messy, clean it up. We're trying to prevent that, but we're not always successful at it. Then we're going to walk through how to start that oxygen settling tanks. So here we are, our 2 tanks. We're going to learn how to put these together safely and perform maintenance on them. All right, first of all, you always want to be sure that your bottles are locked into place. All right, it's an OSHA requirement, good strong chain, it's not going anywhere. The other thing you're going to see in this classroom is these tags. Green, of course, means that it's full. Red means that it's getting near empty. All right? That's why we have red on there right now. It's almost out, but we're going to use it for this demonstration, and then next week buy some new gas. Now, you will see the difference in these two tanks. One already has its gauge on there. That's the oxygen. The acetylene, you'll see, has the shipping cap. Now, this is how you would realistically get them, either from your shop or from the business coming in to deliver the acetylene. Acetylene is typically red. Oxygen is typically green, black, gray. But just read the piece that says these are stickies, and they come on and they go off, and they replace it each time because they have to pressure test them. All right, so we'll step aside here and get our gauges out of the way. Now, our new tank, we just put it in. Now, this is how you're going to walk yourself through it. So write these steps down. The first thing you want to do is unscrew the cap. Now, you'll notice that the green cap is a little bit smaller than the acetylene cap. So you can't put one on the other, okay? It's almost, well, I would say almost idiot-proof, but I've been proven wrong before. All right? So we set these lids off to the side. Hang on to them because you're going to need them later on in your working environment. Now, the size of these tanks are typically in a location where they're not being moved a lot. All right? So now we got the shipping cap off the acetylene. Now, this process that we did, you're going to explain step by step. You first take the shipping cap off the acetylene, and then you would come up here and take the shipping cap off the oxygen. Then you would go back to the acetylene, and now what we want to do is we want to check our threads. Be sure there's no oil, grease, any other grime and crap in there. All right? And if there is, just wipe it out. And then you must stand to the side and quickly open it up and close it. And you're going to get a burst of acetylene, and it's going to stink a little bit. But be sure there's no open flames. The students to your back or to your side are not lighting anything. You just tell them to stop. So I crack it, close it. All right? Now, you don't have to take a wrench to this or anything else, just your hand. Pop it off, pop it on. All right? Simple as that. Now, what you're going to do is you would go to your oxygen bottle. The cap's been removed, and you're going to do the same thing. Stand to the side, crack the knob, close it. Inspect the threads, because oxygen has male threads as acetylene has female threads. All right, so you can't put on oxygen onto acetylene and acetylene onto an oxygen bottle, supposedly. Again, we go right back to the Murphy law, you know. So now, very carefully, because these are very expensive gauges and they're very sensitive, so you can't be tossing these things around all the time. You would get it all straightened out, and now you're going to look at this. Let's take the whole thing in perspective here. All right, you see that there's a little screen in there. That screen is to block anything that you may have not seen inside when you blew it out. All right, it goes down. Now, this is the male end, and this is the female end of the acetylene tank. Well, male fits into female. The other thing that you need to look at is it has cuts all the way around it. That automatically tells you that it's acetylene. And the reason that they did this is because in the military, if you're working at night, you can't really see and you don't have flashlights out there. So they would feel and they could tell that, and it would prevent accidents from happening. All right, now we have 2 gauges up here. Know those names. This is the tank pressure gauge, because you can see that it goes all the way up from 0 to 2,800, all right, pounds. And then this gauge is your working gauge. This gauge goes no higher than 15, ever. All right, there's the red line, common sense, red line must mean something bad, absolutely. All right, we'll be working around 5 and 6 typically, unless I have you on a special project or something. Or if you're cutting metal, then you want to bring it up a little bit more. But we'll discuss that later. Working gauge, tank pressure gauge. Working gauge, tank pressure gauge. Then this is the setting knob that's going to adjust the pressure in your working gauge. There's a diaphragm in here. As you turn this, you'll feel it tighten up, and what it's doing is it's pushing in the diaphragm so it opens it up and allowing the gas to come into your hose. All right? You just want to be sure that that's always back seated. All right? Unless you're using it, it's always back seated. All right? You never, never, never leave pressure in these tanks. Or, excuse me, in the gauges. All right? Now, the next thing you're going to look at is your hoses. All right? Now remember, all these are off, but common sense, look for the cut. Tells you automatically that it's a settling. And you want to look at your complete set of hoses. Pull them out, look at them, so that you know, without any doubt, that those hoses are in good shape. Now, we checked all this, but I bring it out and just be sure, you know, the fittings are all in good shape. The knobs, now look, this is important. The knobs are not, you don't see me tightening down on that, okay? Maybe you'll see it a little bit better without my glove here. But this is vital, all right? Because these things cost initially about $200. But if you have to keep sending them back because people are ruining, this is just brass on brass, all right? So you notice that I'm doing it very lightly. Don't go and sit there and crank on it like that. You don't need to do that. All right, so now you got your gauges, and you also, or correction, you got your torch, and if you see, one side says O, one side says F. Oxygen, fuel. Oxygen, fuel. Now you're wondering to yourself, well, what are these? The older oxygen settling tools didn't have these. You hear backflash, okay? These prevent it. It's a flash suppressor, all right, for them. And it won't cause the flame to go down into the tube, all right? Then you walk up your handle, and you notice that the head is reversible 360 degrees, all right? Depends on if you're left-hander or right-hander, all right? So we'll just set this up for right-hander. And all I do is hand tighten it. Do not put a wrench on this, all right? Now you notice as I'm looking at it, being a right-handed, it's facing the left, all right? And I always hold my torch with this hand, right-handed, left-handed, okay? But right here, not down here, not here, right there, all right? So now we can put these back, and pull out our gauge. Now we're going to send this into the settling tank. Now remember, settling has the notches. It's also back threaded, all right? Or right-handed threads, they call it. All right? Now you don't have to put a lot of pressure on this. Remember, brass bends very easily. You want to set the gauges so you can read them, all right? Don't down here or way up here, where you're comfortable and you can see what's going on. Now, the only tool, now they come with tools, and unfortunately, I don't like them. They don't fit real tight. And if you get some crap from Harbor Freight, don't use the wrench, because you're going to strip this bolt right on the head, guarantee you. All right, now remember, the rule of thumb in this classroom is, whenever you're dealing with oxygen settling, always have a wrench that is black oxide. The reason being is because it will not cause a spark. All right, so I open up my tool, and you notice how I have my wrench, all right? The fixed end is going in the direction in which I'm turning, all right? This piece has to be in the direction you're turning. If I did it this way, I could probably tighten the nut, but the problem is this piece is the weakest link. So, as you've been taught in the tool section, be sure you're square on the tool, hold your gauges, and firmly and steadily just put pressure on it and tighten it up, all right? Now, we have the whole complete set together, and we're ready to go into the operation of it. All right. Hopefully you understood that this is the oxygen tank, this is the settling tank, this is the gauge to the oxygen, and it's left-handed threads. All right, it's always going to be green. All right, be sure that the pressure knob is pulled out. All right, backed off. A settling, again, right-handed threads, firmed up. The gauges are all in good shape. We're ready to go. Now you're going to move on and start working with this. So what you do is you crack this. Now the reason you crack it, all right, is watch this tank pressure gauge. Now remember these words: tank pressure, working pressure. All right? When you crack this, that needle is going to move very quickly. You don't want to open it up so fast that it breaks the spring in here. All right? Crack it. See? Now, in this case, we're really low. We're about almost empty, but for training purposes, we have plenty. All right? But this will go up to about 2,500 psi. All right? Now, once you have oxygen, and this is the oxygen tank, cracked, open it all the way until that knob stops. All right? Once that knob stops, you're good to go. Now you're going to go directly to the working gauge and your thumb screw. All right? This is, as I pull it, turn it in, it's going to adjust my pressure here. One thing you want to do is just check to be sure that your torch head is off, shut off. And again, don't get hulky on me, just firm it up. So now as I turn this, you'll see the working gauge go up eventually. See, there it goes. There's about 10, all right? And that's about all we work with in here. with oxygen is about 10. When you go out and you do cutting torching, then you're going to raise it up to about 20, 25, because the oxygen is what blows the slag out of there. So we know now that this cap is open. We know how much pressure is in our tank because the gauge pressure is there, reading it. We know what the the working gauge pressure is because we've opened up the rubber disc inside, and now we follow it along to our torch head, okay? Now, what I always do, because it's easier in the long run, set that aside, go to your settling tank, and do the exact same thing. We're going to crack it, all right? And then, once you crack it and that needle stops, you want to move it one full turn, all right? One 360-degree circle. So, if this is where my knob is at, and I turn it until I'm right back where I was, all right? Now, along the way, you want to keep checking to be sure you have no leaks, all right? And we have leak detectors. The liquid bubbles is the best, all right? But these gauges are set up for you already. There'll be times when, example, when I go to get these things filled next week, I may just bring them in here and drop them, and they'll be all disconnected. Next student, here you go, all right? I try to keep it as real as I can constantly in here. So we know that we got pressure in our tank because our pressure tank gauge, our gauge pressure for the tank is reading. Again, we already know that our gauges are closed because I checked that out. Now you start turning the thumb screw, and it'll start to move up slowly. There, and we leave it about 5 or 6. Now, let's say you screwed up setting this up and you got ahead of yourself. Let's just say that you turned, for instance, the oxygen, all right? You turn that baby all the way up to 20. Okay, what you have to do now is you're going to back this off. It doesn't matter, oxygen, acetylene, operation is still the same. You're going to back off your thumb screw. Maybe 2 clicks, or 2 clicks. You're going to back off your thumb screw about 2 rotations. Then you're going to find your knob for your oxygen and release it. Now watch the pressure in the working gauge. See how it drops? I close my valve again. Now I can go back and pay attention this time to what I'm doing. All right? Don't panic. You know, sometimes if you're not paying attention, the student before you has already shoved this thing in there and he was in a hurry, left it, nobody caught it. Pay attention, and then on top of that, bring it to my attention. Because I know who uses this equipment. All right, so now the oxygen bottle is set up. The acetylene bottle is set up. We've checked out our gauges. We've checked out our hoses. Now, we're ready to move on. Okay. So now, we've set our gauge, or our handle down. Now we all know that this is all good, this area is all good, and we've checked it with our leak detector all the way up to the torch head. Now you're going to light it. Now remember, down here were the strikers. All right. Striker, all you have to do is push down and pull at the same time till you get that little innocent spark. Now remember, now here comes controversy. You can find 4 different books, and you're going to get 4 different answers on how to do this. But this is the way we will do it. When you first come here to light this, you are always going to put your fuel on first. All right? So we crack our fuel. It takes about an eighth of a turn, and then you get it with the striker. If it doesn't light right away, just bring up the pressure. All right? Now, when you're looking at this, I just got really lucky because typically you'll have soot coming out of here, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. If you backed off on the acetylene, you see that soot? All right, you don't want that. So once you light it, you want to bring it out and get rid of that soot as quickly as possible. So you want it so that the flame is still connected to the tip, that you got a nice feather out here, and there's no soot. Now, when it's in that position, lightly turn your oxygen on. All right? Now, when you first turn it on, you'll get something going on like that. All right? We want to bring it back so we get what is known as a neutral flame. That's a neutral flame, and the reason it's a neutral flame is you'll see when I did it earlier, I had three flames in here: the feather, the inner, and the very high intensity flame. You can see the three flames very easily, especially when you get out here. But that isn't what we need to do for this type of task that we want to do. That's the flame that you want to have, which is a neutral flame. You got one big excessively hot spot, and then you got this nice feather out here. Now I'll show you later why you have that feather. All right? This is probably the hardest part of this whole exercise for students, is understanding how to work the oxygen acetylene. Now I can waste your time, and I'm not going to, because every student's a little different. We try to get them to learn this technique. Each instructor's a little bit different, but the basic concept is always the same. If it doesn't look something similar to that, you don't have it right. Now, remember earlier I said there was a controversy? Well, here comes the controversy. What do you turn off first? The oxygen or the acetylene? Well, the rules that I go by, because of the books I've read on this and the people I've talked to, is the fuel is the explosive part. Now, a long time ago when you didn't have the spark arresters, you would have to turn off the oxygen first, because then you wouldn't get backfire. All right? Now, we always go with turn off the fuel first. You'll hear a little pop. All right? But just make it quick. And I didn't crank on this at all. Just firmed it up. It's closed. Now my oxygen's still open, but it's not explosive. All right? And lightly turn that off. That's the way that you're going to do it in this lab. All right? You're going to turn on the acetylene first, light it, adjust it, add your oxygen, adjust it, shut off your fuel, shut off your oxygen. That's the way it has to be done. Now, while you're making your step-by-steps, all right, be sure that you understand what has to happen up to this point. because you won't be using your notes for the hands-on testing portion of it. All right? You can come out here and pull these away, and you can work through them, understand them, dry run, anything you want except for setting it up for live action. All right? So now we take our torch, set it down. We come over here, and I try to keep this simple. All right? The last one that I turned on was acetylene. It's going to be the first one I turn off because this is the explosive. So I just turn it off, firm it up. That's all you got to do. Now you notice that the gauges all stay the same. Nothing happens there. I go over to my oxygen. I do the same thing all the way in. All right? Do not touch these two knobs here. All right? Because there's oxygen and acetylene from that valve all the way through these hoses through this torch. The first thing you're going to do is, because the fuel, you'll open up the fuel and watch the gauges drop. All right? Now sometimes you get a little odor in here, okay? But because the fan's on, you shouldn't really smell it. The next step that I'm going to take is back my thumb screw off where it's just loose, all right? The next thing I'm going to do is, again, go back to my oxygen. I know it's closed. Now I set it, and the gauges will drop. All right? Close my valve, and then back the thumb screw out. All right? Now, that is the proper way of setting up and taking down a set of oxygen tanks. Oxygen settling tanks, excuse me. All right? You need to practice this dry run until it becomes second nature. Because as long as you're stumbling, you have a problem. And we're not having problems. So be sure that the knobs are tight, everything is cleaned up, everything's secured. Now, typically you want this to cool off, all right? I'm gonna just leave it here and let it alone and let the tip of that cool, because you never wanna wrap these things, because this thing, the gauge just kind of flips around all over the place. And if it touches the tube, it could melt it. And then the next time you light up, that won't be the only thing that gets lit up. All right? We're not doing Michael Jackson Pepsi commercials. All right? We just want it to be safe. All right? If you have any questions, watch this CD again until it becomes second nature. When you come out here, you can have your notes, and you can say, hey, I like to dry run this test. That's the dry run. I pretend that there's caps on there and the whole 9 yards that we explained earlier. All right? And walk yourself through it. When you do not need your notes and you memorize this, then you can ask for an instructor to come and check you out. The instructor is going to tell you, okay, talk me through this. When you say talk me through it, that's exactly what he wants you to do. Talk yourself through it in a dry run. Then he's going to say, okay, let me see you get the torch all set up with full fuel and everything. He'll do it again. He'll just watch you. Then he'll say, okay, now light the torch. Now, the lighting process will not happen just once, because most people haven't done it. All right? Therefore, you need to take your time and understand how to adjust the flame, shut off the gas, relight it, shut it off, relight it. It may take you 10 times, may take you 20 times, it doesn't matter, because we need to have it right. Once you have it right, then you can drain the whole tank, the whole system. When you leave this area, if you've been working with the oxygen settling, you better be sure that it's thoroughly checked out, all right? And I don't need to tell you about dumping your water, putting your rod back into the safe hole, all right? Be sure that everything's neat and cleaned up, hoses are wrapped up, gauges are squared away as they designed. If you have any questions, review the CD. Again, if you're still having problems, come on out here and see one of us. We're here to help you, but we need you to participate in this. Also, your AHRI book has a great section in there about oxygen settling. All right?